we'd just gotten started with using your words wisely last week, and by way you have the passage I think we referred to it's not in the book, in James chapter 1, that says, "Let every man be swift to hear and slow to" what? Speak. Swift to hear and slow to speak. And looking at this section on using your words wisely, it says, think carefully. Think carefully. That means to think carefully before you speak. And this is something that I still struggle with. One thing I fail to do is to think ahead of time of what I ought to say before I get to a particular place. For example, let's just say you're going to go visit somebody in the nursing home. You're going to go visit somebody in the hospital, or you're going to go to a visitation or a funeral, or sit with somebody who's sick or having a surgery. When you know that you're going to be in those types of situations, when you know those ahead of time, you do well to think ahead of time what you're going to say to that individual right out of the box. In other words, what do I want the first, what should be the first thing they hear from me when I get there? Because if I choose my word, if I think carefully and I choose my words wisely, then what I say from the very beginning really sets the tone for the rest of that visit. Because if I say something dumb, or I say something that appears thoughtless, even though I say it with the best of intentions, you say it can put a damper on it. You can accidentally hurt people's feelings. And so the concept here is, first of all, is when you know you're going to be in a situation, think and prepare yourself ahead of time, and choose your words very carefully. Also, I think it would be wise to consider in the phrase "slow to speak." In addition to being slow to speak, is also the thought of use your words judiciously. In other words, well, I'm reminded there. I don't even know why or where I saw this movie, but there was an Eddie Murphy movie a number of years ago where there was a tree that had leaves on it, and every time he spoke, a leaf fell off that tree. In other words, all of his words were numbered. And in the early part of the movie, he just talking. It just looked like the leaves would be showering. And then finally he figured out what was going on, and then he didn't want to speak at all. And he knew he had to choose his words very carefully because he only had so many words left on the tree. Now that's not true for us, but I think the principle ought to still be in our minds. That a lot of times the less that is said is better. In other words, if people are grieving, if people are worried or they're concerned, there's something going on, they're sick, and somebody just comes in and just starts yammering and talking their ear off, that's not helpful. In fact, it's quite stressful. And so to use our words carefully and to be very judicious in our use of language or our words, meantime, the less, a lot of times, less is more. Less is more. Think about, Job's comforters. Job's comforters. Man, they were full of words, weren't they? And even Job said, "You're full of words." But he also said this, "You are miserable comforters." You are miserable comforters. And then the one friend that we don't hear from until 3/4 of the way through the book is Elihu, who finally speaks, and he was silent out of deference for the age and what he was hoping would be the wisdom of age from Bildad, Eliphaz, and Zophar, and even Job himself. But Elihu held his tongue, and so there's a lot of times there's a place when silence is is the best consoler. You know, the best consoler. And so to think carefully, I wrote down here, and I may have mentioned this last time, but you know, there's an old adage, measure twice and cut once. If you're building a thing, measure twice, cut once. Well, we could add that, think twice, speak once. In other words, not just think, but let's think about thinking about what we're going to say. All right? And so, and then he just makes the mention that, you know, lots of people unwittingly devastate friends and family on a daily basis because of what they say, even if it's unwitting. In other words, it's not intended. And so, as he says, results are what count, so keep that tongue under control until weighing the impact that words will have on the other person. Consider how they will hear it, not just how it is intended. All right? And then the next one is compliment credibly. Credibly. In other words, be generous in your compliments, but make sure that the compliment has some measure of truth. Don't. I thought about what. In a minute I'll get to it, but I kept thinking about the one that's next on praise creatively, and compliment credibly. But people know that if the compliments that we give are sincere, and if they're based in any measure of reality or truth. But in the bottom one, I thought this is the one that I kept thinking about, even all the way back to last week, was praise creatively. Praise creatively. And I think it might have been last Friday I was playing golf with Jerry and some guys, and we were talking about something along these lines. And I said, he's got potential is the best and worst thing you can say about an individual, especially an athlete. He's got potential. What does that mean? He's got potential. Well, what does that mean? That means that you can really see a lot of ability that needs to be developed, or you don't see really anything, but that's the nicest thing you think you might be able to say. And so he's got potential. It could be the best or worst thing that you could say, particularly about an athlete. I thought about what I used to say about a lady at East Wood Street when I was there. And I'm not going to say her name because there's probably some people watching. Now, listen, she's long since dead. She was old as Moses when I was there. But she used to come in. Now, she used to come in. I'm going to tell this story because I think it's funny. But when you drove up the ramp into the over the awning, and you walked through the doors, and then you made a left turn into the main office space, and then my office and Roger's office were off of the main office space. And early in the mornings, we'd all get there about 7:45, 8 o'clock, and sit, and there was a window that you could see the ramp, the up ramp. And I'd always sit with my back to that window drinking coffee, and Roger sat across from the little table drinking coffee, and the secretary Joyce sat at hers, and we'd drink coffee and start the morning. So we're sitting here drinking coffee, and I see this look of terror come across Roger's face. And he says, "Come on, Junior." He called me Junior. That was my nickname. He called me Junior. He said, "Come on, Junior." And I didn't even ask no questions. I jumped up, I had my coffee in my hand, and I'm following him, and he's running down the hallway. He makes a left turn at the end of the hallway, goes into the stairwell and up to the second floor. And I'm right behind him, and I have no idea why I'm running. No idea why I'm running. Well, the reason we were running was there was a lady, this older lady used to come in about 3 days a week. And whoever's office she picked, you could just count on about 2 or 3 hours of your day just getting shot. Because she's going to sit in there and gripe and complain for about literally 2 or 3 hours. All right? And so Roger saw her car coming up the ramp. And so when I saw that look of terror, and he said, "Come on, Junior," we ran up and we hid in the classroom on the second floor for about 15 minutes until she left, because we could see the car from the upstairs window in the Bible class. All right? So I thought about what nice thing might I say about that lady. And I thought about it, and I thought if I'm ever called on, if Roger's gone and she dies and I have to preach her funeral, I'll just say, she's a very motivating person. That's creative praise. She's a very motivating person. When she comes, people start moving. Right? Praise creatively. Listen, I'll never forget that day as long as I live. I wish Roger was here just to tell it, because it just cracks him up, because he said, "I've never seen anybody run down the hall and climb stairs with a cup of coffee and never spill any of it." And I didn't. But anyway, praise creatively. Just look for some way to praise. Fortunately, I didn't have to use that line. She outlived me. At least she lived past me being there. But in any event, on top of page 89, there's some creative ways or some thoughts here. It says, and I never really thought about this. I guess maybe I have, but I hadn't thought of it in this sense. A competent performance by someone doing his best is more deserving of accolades than an effortless performance of a more gifted person. Now, Luke's coached football at Hamilton a lot. You've been in a lot of practices, and I know, and Stephanie is a cheer coach. That you've seen the kid that doesn't have all the ability in the world, but he gives you, or she gives you absolutely everything they've got. And then you've got the gifted athlete that can produce that result, or even slightly better, without giving everything they've got. And the kid that gives you everything is certainly worthy of more praise than the kid who's just simply satisfied to be better than everybody else, but not be the best that they can be. I think that's probably one of the differences between really great athletes. There's probably a lot of guys that could be good enough to play NFL football or NBA or Major League Baseball, but they've always just been satisfied to be the best where they are, as opposed to being the best that they can be. And so the person that gives you everything they've got is certainly worthy of more praise than the person who just simply skates by on ability. And it says, take notice of progress as well as accomplishment. In other words, when you see that somebody has moved, if they're trying to get from A to D, when you see they make it to B, compliment that progress, and then compliment the next stage of progress, then compliment the accomplishment of that process. In other words, a person doesn't have to get from the starting point to the end point before we can praise them and encourage them. It talks about express faith in a person's abilities to succeed. I know you can do this. I know this seems hard, but I know you can do this. I watched a guy today who was he's a vet. And he had done 3 tours in Afghanistan, and on his 3rd tour, he was married and had a 6-month-old baby. And said they were actually out running the mine sweepers, he said, and I set my backpack down on a bomb. He says, and when it went off, my right leg and my right arm were gone immediately. And when I got to Walter Reed Hospital, my left leg was beyond repair, and they cut it off. He said, and a few days later, they cut my left arm off because the flesh had started to die. He said, and there I am, no legs and no arms. And he said, just hadn't been there but just a handful of days. And he said, the guy's name, I don't even remember what his deal was. I think he may have just been a paraplegic. I said, just a paraplegic. Well, his name is Todd Nicely. I remember his name. Todd Nicely. And he walks in, he tells this guy, he says, you're going to be fine. Whatever you have to do, you can do it. You can do it. And he said, I looked at him and said, and he was a Marine, and I knew as dumb as Marines were, if he could do it, I knew I could do it. Because he was kind of giving an inspirational talk. But you think about, here's a guy that literally has lost both arms and both legs in a moment's time. But he said, that one guy that walked in there in my room and told me that I could do it made all the difference in the world. And he's got 2 prosthetic legs. He's got different legs. He's got the ones that got the blades that you can run on, and he runs. And he's got the regular legs that that have the feet with the shoes on them for just every day. And he's got an arm with a robotic hand. What they've been able to do for him is incredible. But he said he owed every bit of it to one guy that walked into his room and said, "You're going to be just fine. You're going to be just fine." And he was able to look at that guy and say, like I said, if he can do it, I can do it. And I wish I could remember the guys. I can only remember the encourager's name. I don't remember the name of the guy that gave the talk. But just that idea right there is that I believe in you, and you can accomplish whatever you've got to get done. You can do it. He said, I owe everything to him. And he talked about his love, also for his family. Says, let you know you believe in them, give them a reputation and self-image to live up to. In other words, set a bar for people and say, look, I know you can do this. Speak specifically. Speak specifically. He talks about in this, he calls it talking about the preacher standing at the back of the line. Of course, I told a joke on myself at that after dinner speech that I had to do in Montgomery last week, and I told it about standing on what's called the liar's line, where you shake the brethren out and they all tell you good job, good job. That's the liar's line. Because you get the same thing week after week, after week, and but when the person comes out and says something like he says right here, he says. I was really moved this morning when you made the point about. In other words, somebody remembers something specific about what you said, and then relates that back to you. I thought one of the I don't even know how to even say this. One of the nicest or most appreciated compliments I got from Stephanie. It's been several years ago, but I preached a sermon that was way out of my comfort zone, called "When Jesus Passed By," and it was more of a narrative type sermon than the normal type sermon where I get up and I tell you what I'm going to tell you, and then I tell it to you, and I put it in 3 or 4 points, and then we go out. This was a narrative type sermon, and I was really nervous about preaching it, and it wasn't even my sermon. I heard somebody else preach it, and I had to adapt it, and on a Sunday afternoon, I don't even think maybe we'd even gone out to eat dinner that day, but I got a text from him that said, "Great sermon this morning." Well, somebody else probably told me that I did a good job in the foyer, but somebody, an hour and a half down the road, takes the time to pull the cell phone out and text you a message. It means a lot to you. Well, and obviously it meant a lot to me because I still remember it. And so, the compliments that are specific are the ones that we remember the most. And then at the bottom it talks about inspire indelibly, and what he means by that is take time to put something in somebody's hands that they can hold on to for the future. Obviously, I could have saved that text from Stephanie, but I would never find it because between all the checks and things that have to be written and all this and back and forth, there's no telling where that text would be in our list. But, I've received, and I still have them. 27 years ago, I was published in Gospel Advocate magazine because I was 25 years. I remember it because my article title was called "A 25-Year-Old Dinosaur," and I wrote an article for Gospel Advocate, and Brother Curley published it, and they sent me 3 or 4 or 5 copies. I remember I sent a copy of it to my mother. I said, it's not the cover of the Rolling Stone, but it's about as close as I'll ever get. And if you remember that old song, but I got two or three of the nicest letters from people that I didn't even know, who had read the article and taken time to write me. Come to find out, one of them was J.C. Bailey, who's was one of the most well-known missionaries in Canada, and I think even in Japan. You guys have probably heard of him at some point in time. I'd never heard of J.C. Bailey. And when I got that letter, it was just a nice letter from some old dude. Then when I found out who it was, it meant a whole lot more to me. And then I got another letter from a woman I'd never heard of, Lottie Beth Hobbs, who's probably written between Jane McWhirter and what's her name? Wilberta Arrowwood. Lottie Beth Hobbs has probably written as many books for our ladies and ladies classes as any woman in the 20th century. All I knew I got a really nice letter from an old woman. And then when I saw who it was, it's like, wow. These are people that are really busy. These are people that a lot of people know and respect. And I still have those letters. I still have letters that I got from Hugo McCord and Jimmy Jividin. I still got them stacked up in my office in there, because and not that I ever go back and read them, but the point is, when you write a card or a note to somebody, I've still got a little letter, and I'm pretty sure it's in an old cigar box in my office, that one of my high school best friends, who's 2 years older than me, that he wrote to me when I graduated high school. He'd already been out to college. He was on a football scholarship at Missouri Southern, and he wrote me a letter about what it was like to go to college. And he says when you have the urge to go out and spend time with your friends, and you need to study. Says all those other times will keep, those other opportunities will present themselves all the time. Says, but that test will only be taken once. And he just wrote me a little letter. And I still have that letter from 1985. That he wrote me to encourage me. And so when you have the opportunity, I've got a bunch of blank cards and stuff in my office at the house now, where I try to write notes along the way, or I try to send birthday cards along the way, because I know what all of those things mean to me. And so when we means indelibly, in other words, put something in somebody's hands that'll never be erased. Somebody can pay you a compliment by mouth, but it's not, it's not going to stick the way that when you hold that letter and you read that thing, and then you read it again and again, and then you don't throw it away, you tuck it away somewhere, and then you forget about it until it pops up when you're digging through your drawer again and you find it. And so the opportunity to encourage in writing is, there's no value you can put on it. And so the ability to inspire indelibly. That's right. Nobody writes anymore because you have email and you have texting. We have the continuous communication, and you're exactly right. Writing means a whole lot more now to people, because you've really taken some time, to sit down and put pen to paper. At the bottom of 89, over in the 90s, it says, "Be an encourager now." And I'm really not sure why this particular text was chosen from Hebrews 12. when you could have looked at Hebrews 3 and verse 13 that says, exhort one another daily while it is called today. To me, that's the verse. Be an encourager now. Daily while it's called today, lest any of you become hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. Then I even think about the letter of Hebrews in and of itself. The first 2 chapters are encouragement. God, who at sundry times in diverse manners spoke unto the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken unto us by His Son. What an encouraging statement. God's not just speaking through some guy that lived He spoke to us now by His Son, through whom He made the worlds. That is an opening line of encouragement. And then you go through the rest of chapter 1 and you get to chapter 2 that says, He became flesh so that He could taste death for every man. That's encouragement. And because He did these things, He is able to assist those who are tempted. That's encouragement. He's just the whole chapters 1 and 2 of Hebrews are continuous statements of encouragement. And so that letter is just filled with encouragement from the get-go. And so I thought about those passages much more than Hebrews chapter 12 and verses 1 through 3. And in the paragraph, there's 2 paragraphs where it begins, all Christians. Begins there. It says, all Christians are bound to experience spiritual fatigue and cramps at some point. In other words, the Christian life is a long race. It's a marathon. And at some point in our lives as Christians, we're all going to, there's the phrase, you're going to hit the wall. I remember training for my first marathon, and I went out, and of course I was still living in Parsons, so I ran to the courthouse and back, which was 21 miles. And I'd been training, so I felt pretty good. And I ran 21 miles, and I felt great. When I got done, I felt great. And so, of course, first person I called was Bentley, because Bentley was the one that got me into that mess. I called Judge Bentley. He said, that's great. He says, did you feel like you could run another 5 miles? I said, yeah, John, I sure did. I said, I felt like I could run all day. And he said, you got 21 in. He says, but 22 is where the wall is. 22 is where the wall is. And I remember the first time I set out and I ran from my house to the Hamilton Church building and back. And I got to mile 22. And not only did I hit a wall, but a 600-pound gorilla jumped on my back. And I thought, there it is. At mile 20, I still felt great. At 21, I still felt great. But when I hit 22, somewhere right in 22, man, I was just putting one foot in front of the other, trying to get home. Just trying to get home. And by the way, it's 4 miles from the cell phone tower down there at the B Mountain Cutoff. That's about where it jumped on me, which means I had to run up that big long hill to the Greg place. And it was just like, I was trying to put one foot in front of the other. And I got to Godsey Spring, and I got me a drink, and I knew when I was at Godsey Spring, I still had 1 full mile to go. And that was torture. It was torture. Because I sit there and I got a drink, and I ran the water all over me, and I got my shoes wet. And so I had to run the last mile in soaking wet socks and shoes. All right. But imagine this. Imagine this. You see me running down the road, and you see me, I might be walking, or you can tell I'm struggling, and you're going to mock me. Right? You're going to mock me. You're going to say, pick it up, Forrest Gump. Or run, Forrest. If I had $1 for every time I heard run, Forrest while I was on the highway, I probably have a boat as nice as Dennis's.
No, I saw you and Philip one time, and you both had green shirts on, and I said, there's 2 peas in a pod.
That's right. Yeah, 2 knuckleheads, idiots. But imagine you're going, and when I started running, from that day forward, I never made fun of people that were running. Because I knew what it was like to be a runner. Whether you run, I've got a friend in our running club. She runs and she posts her runs all the time. She runs about 13-minute miles. 13. That's not very fast. I nearly walk it fast. But you know what? I'm proud of her. Every time she runs 3, 4, 5, whatever miles, I'm proud of her because she's out there. And I'm not gonna say 13-minute miles. Pff, that ain't nothing. People that run know. And you don't mock people that have struggled. Well, he's talking about the same thing here. He's talking about the Christians, when they run, they hit the wall, they get tired. There's times when in our Christian lives we feel like we're just trying to put one foot in front of the other to get home. And imagine if one of our brethren were to in some way discourage us. To mock us or to discourage us or in some way hinder us, from reaching our goal. And that's the thing that he mentions here. And he says, Christians must never speak a word that might add to the burden of a discouraged brother. Christians must never speak a word that may add to the struggles or burden of a discouraged brother. And so I thought that was a great example that he used here. Over on the page 91, let's close this out. How to discourage the flow of communication. Number 1, interrupt. Don't let people finish. When I interrupt, subconsciously what it says is, I think what I have to say is more important than what you have to say. Don't interrupt. But yet we live in a world that thrives in interruption. I quit watching sports talk shows, in February 2014, 13 or 14, I can't remember. But I gave up watching them. Not because they're always interrupting one another, but if you watch any of them, nobody ever gets a sentence out before somebody else interrupts. In fact, one of the most popular shows is called Pardon the Interruption. And so, and by the way, those two guys actually let each other speak more than other people do. But, it's just a continuous barrage of interruptions and insults and your opinion is dumb and whatnot. And, as Sweet Brown would say, ain't nobody got time for that. And so interruption is the way to discourage the flow of communication. Obviously, criticism discourages or staunches the flow of communication. Advice. Now, I want you to look at this. Under where it says advice. Is that the first bell? Okay. It says, when someone tells you about a problem, don't try to solve it unless he asks you to. All right? He wrote that wrong. It should say, unless she asks you to. I'm right. If somebody tells you about a problem, don't try to solve it unless she asks you to. Now, where you at, Dennis? There he is. All right. Me and Dennis are talking. All right? We're talking about hunting or guns or bow or something. And I tell you about a problem I've got. Right? What do I want you to do?
You want my advice?
I want your advice. I want you to help me solve my problem. When two men are talking to one another and one of them tells the other one about a problem that he's got, he wants some help solving his problem, right? All right. Now, Dennis and Brandy are talking. And Brandy's talking to Dennis. And she's telling Dennis about a problem that she has. What's Brandy want?
She just wants to tell her a problem.
That's exactly right. That's why he didn't write this right, Linda Gibbs. You don't try to solve the problem unless she asks you to solve it. That's the difference between women and men. All right? But being a man, what are you going to try to do?
I'm going to try to listen to her.
And then you're going to try to solve it.
Yes.
That's right. Even if she don't ask you, you're going to, and you might even tell her. Because since she tells you the problem, you got a solution, don't you?
Yes.
You think you do.
Until I tell her what my solution is.
Yeah, and then it ain't no count, is it?
No.
See, Hey, been there a million times, dude. Been there a million times. What's a matter of opinion? What's a matter of opinion? No, it ain't no opinion. I'm telling you what the truth is. When a woman tells a man a problem, she ain't looking for that man to solve that problem. She just wants him to listen to her. But when a man tells another man a problem, he wants help solving his problem. Now that's right. That is right. Right? And everybody in here knows it's right, and everybody watching on Facebook knows it's right. Right? Now, when two women are talking to each other about a problem, does the second woman try to solve a problem? No. Why? Because she knows her friend just wants to talk to her about her problem. And she'll give advice if she's asked. But a man is going to give his advice as soon as he hears the problem. And he's got the solution just like that, right? All right? That's just, look, men and women are different. Right? And anybody that denies that is a fool. All right? That's exactly right, Grace. God made us like that. And one way is not better than the other. They're just different. But we have to realize that they are different. So don't offer advice unless you're asked for advice. Unless you're talking to a man and you are a man, wherein giving someone your problem is the same as asking for advice. All right? All right. Next page. Embarrassing or condescension. Obviously, those things are self-explanatory. I went down to about the fourth one down. Overreact. Overreaction is a hindrance to communication. You know, people either with a short fuse or just, they don't, as well, in Proverbs 16 and verse 32, it talks about a man who rules over his own spirit. You know, a man who doesn't rule over his own spirit is completely unstable. But a man who rules over his own spirit is strong. The Bible says he's a strong man. He's a strong man. Read that text. And so, overreaction is a hindrance to communication and a hindrance to encouragement. Distortion of facts is a hindrance to communication. You know, you get a lot of this in the political arena. You know, if you watch anything, you can't hardly believe anything comes out of anybody's mouth because it's always going to be a distortion of facts. All right? I thought about ABC News showed a clip of what they said was the war in Syria. And they showed all these explosions going on. And it was actually a film from Kentucky from a military exercise. A military exercise in the state of Kentucky. But it was presented because that was the narrative. So they distorted the truth in order to promote their narrative. All right? And so distortion, overlooking and forgetting are other hindrances. All right, so Kyle's got next week. And so I appreciate him for volunteering for that.